I decided to buy the last $2 lottery ticket at a store. When I checked the numbers, I had won $81 million. I had never won before. But when I called the manager, he went pale. "Ma'am, I need to warn you." Good day, dear listeners. It's Maria again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Carol Simmons, and I want to tell you about the day my ordinary life cracked open like an egg. And everything that spilled out afterward was nothing I could have predicted. Before all of this, I was what you might call invisible. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that made for good stories at dinner parties, just quietly invisible. I was 53 years old, working as a records coordinator at a mid-sized insurance company in Columbus, Ohio. I drove a 2014 Honda Civic that made a sound like a dying accordion every time I hit 30 miles per hour. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment on Granville Road, kept a small herb garden on the windowsill, and watched true crime documentaries on Friday nights with my cat, Biscuit. My daughter, Melissa, was 26 and lived 40 minutes away in Westerville. We talked on the phone every Sunday. That was my life. Tidy, modest, and entirely mine. I had been married once. His name was Dennis, and we divorced when Melissa was 9. It wasn't ugly, just hollow. Two people who had stopped being interesting to each other. He remarried quickly. A woman named Pam, who was younger and louder and always seemed to be laughing at something I hadn't heard. They moved to Phoenix. I stayed in Columbus. I didn't mind. What I did mind, though I hadn't yet let myself fully admit it, was what had been happening at work over the past 8 months. It started small. I noticed that certain files I'd processed were being routed differently. Documents I'd flagged for standard review were suddenly marked as resolved before my supervisor, Gary Whitfield, had even looked at them. I mentioned it once casually at a team meeting. Gary gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes and said the system had been optimized. The woman sitting next to him, Sandra Krause, his deputy, who had been passed over for the same promotion Gary got 3 years ago and had never forgiven the world for it, wrote something in her notepad without looking up. Sandra. If this story has a villain, she wears reading glasses and a cardigan and smells like lavender hand cream. I started paying closer attention. I kept my own log at home, a plain spiral notebook, documenting discrepancies, files that appeared twice, timestamps that didn't match, a reimbursement request that I had submitted in March and that had simply vanished from the system by May. Was I paranoid? Maybe. But here's the thing about women like me. Women who have been quietly doing their jobs for decades without recognition. We notice things. We notice everything. We just usually don't say it out loud. That was on a Wednesday in early November. On Thursday, I worked late. I stopped at the Kroger on Morse Road on my way home just to pick up cat food and a bottle of Pinot Grigio. I was tired. My lower back ached. The fluorescent lights in the store made everyone look slightly ill. I was standing in the express lane when I saw it. A small display rack near the register, almost empty. A single lottery ticket remained, sitting slightly crooked in the slot like it had been waiting. A Mega Millions ticket. $2. I don't play the lottery. I never play the lottery. I think of it the way I think of carnival games. A gentle, consensual robbery. But that night, I don't know. Maybe it was the back pain. Maybe it was Sandra's blank notepad face. I reached out and took the last ticket. "You're the last one tonight," the teenage cashier said, scanning it without interest. "Story of my life," I said, and meant it more than he knew. I tucked the ticket into my coat pocket and forgot about it entirely. That evening, I fed Biscuit, drank half the wine, and fell asleep on the couch during a documentary about a man in Michigan who had faked his own death to avoid paying alimony. I remember thinking, just before I drifted off, that people were remarkably creative when they felt cornered. I found the ticket again the next evening, crumpled in my coat. Checked the numbers on my phone out of habit the way you check the weather, not expecting anything, just completing a small ritual. Then I checked again. Then I sat very still for approximately 4 minutes. Then I called the lottery office number listed on the ticket's website. A recorded message said to contact the regional claims manager, a man named Howard Briggs, during business hours. I called anyway. He picked up on the third ring, which surprised me. I told him my numbers. I heard him type. I heard silence, then a long breath. "Ma'am," Howard Briggs said, and his voice had changed. Careful now, almost reluctant. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Before you do anything, before you tell anyone, there are some things you need to understand." My hand tightened on the phone. "What kind of things?" I asked. Another pause. "The kind," he said slowly, "that could protect you or destroy you if you get this wrong." I looked at Biscuit. Biscuit looked at me. Outside, Columbus went on being Columbus. Quiet, flat, utterly ordinary. Nothing would be ordinary again. Howard Briggs asked me to come to the regional lottery office the following Monday morning. He told me to bring the physical ticket, a valid ID, and this was the part that stopped my breath. He told me not to deposit any money, not to contact any financial institution, and not to discuss the win with anyone until we had spoken in person. "Not even family?" I asked. "Especially not family," he said. "Ma'am, I know this sounds dramatic, but $81 million creates a very specific kind of problem. Please trust me on this." I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table for the next 3 hours and thought about every terrible thing that could happen to a woman alone with a lottery ticket worth $81 million. I thought about my sister, Denise, who lived in Cleveland and had been borrowing small sums of money from me since 2019. 50 here, 100 there, always with a story that was plausible enough that I'd never wanted to press her on it. I thought about Dennis's wife, Pam, who had once said at Melissa's college graduation that I looked tired but brave, which I still considered one of the most precisely calibrated insults I had ever received. I thought about Gary Whitfield at work and Sandra Krause and the files that kept disappearing. I thought about Melissa and how much I wanted to call her, how much I wanted to hear her voice and say, "Baby, something happened, something incredible." But I didn't, because Howard Briggs had said not to, and something in his voice, not panic, but professional gravity, the voice of a man who had seen this go wrong before, had convinced me he was right. Instead, I got out my spiral notebook, the one where I'd been tracking the discrepancies at work. I turned to a fresh page and I wrote one word at the top: exposure. Then I drew a line down the middle of the page. On one side, I wrote, "Who knows?" On the other, "Who can't know yet?" On the left side, I wrote, "Howard Briggs." On the right side, I wrote everyone else in my life: Denise, Melissa, Gary, Sandra, my neighbor Phil, who was nosy in a cheerful, harmless way, my coworker Janet, who I genuinely liked, but who had the discretion of a foghorn. I stared at the page. Then I thought about what I actually knew about lottery winners in this country. I knew that roughly 70% of lottery winners end up broke within 5 years. I knew that predatory financial advisors targeted new winners. I knew that relatives appeared, relatives you hadn't thought about in years, the moment money became public. I knew that in Ohio, lottery winners' names were public record unless you claim through a trust. a trust. I wrote that word on the page, underlined it twice. I didn't know anything about trusts, not really. I coordinated insurance records for a living, but I knew how to research. I had spent 8 months researching missing files at work with nothing but a spiral notebook and a library card. Surely I could learn enough in a weekend to walk into Monday's meeting with something resembling a plan. I made coffee. I opened my laptop. I spent Friday night and all of Saturday reading every legal article I could find about lottery prize claim structures, blind trusts, LLCs as claiming entities, and privacy protection strategies for large jackpots. I took notes, real notes, specific, organized, the way I used to take notes in college when I was paying for every credit hour myself and couldn't afford to miss anything. By Sunday morning, I had a framework. It wasn't perfect. I needed a lawyer, a real one, and I needed one who specialized in this. But I had enough to know what questions to ask and what traps to avoid. The biggest trap, I'd learned, was moving too fast. The second biggest trap was trusting the wrong person at the wrong moment. I thought again about Denise, about the pattern of those small loans, the way each request came with just enough self-awareness. I know this is a lot to ask, Carol. I know I keep doing this. To make refusing feel cruel. I thought about how she'd react when she found out. Not if, when. Because in Ohio, even with a trust, certain things became public eventually. I thought about how much I loved my sister, and how loving someone didn't mean being naive about them. That afternoon, I called a law firm I had found online, a small firm in Dublin, Ohio, that specialized in estate planning and asset protection. I left a message for an attorney named Rachel Okonkwo. I didn't say why I was calling. I just said I needed to discuss a significant financial matter, and that confidentiality was my primary concern. Then I wrapped the lottery ticket in a piece of aluminum foil, sealed it in a Ziploc bag, and put it inside a box of old tax returns in my closet, the least glamorous hiding place in America. Monday morning, I got up early. I dressed carefully, not formally, not in a way that would be memorable. Dark slacks, a gray blouse. I drove to the regional lottery office on North High Street. Howard Briggs was a compact, careful man in his late 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and the manner of someone who had delivered both very good and very bad news many times and had learned to keep his face neutral for both. He shook my hand and closed the door. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to be clear about something. What I'm going to tell you is not my job, technically. My job is to process claims. But I've been doing this for 22 years, and what I've seen happen to people who weren't prepared—" He paused. "I sleep better when I say it out loud." "Say it," I told him. He leaned forward. "Mrs. Simmons," he said, "the moment this becomes public, your life will change in ways you are not ready for. There are people who make a living finding winners before they've protected themselves. There are attorneys who will contact you within 48 hours of any public filing. There are family members, even ones you trust, who will behave in ways you never imagined possible." "I understand," I said. "I don't think you do yet," he said, not unkindly, "but you will." He was right. I just didn't know how right yet. Rachel Okonkwo called me back on Tuesday morning, 40 minutes before I was due at work. Her voice was brisk and warm at the same time, the voice of someone who was both competent and human, which I had learned over 53 years was a rarer combination than it should be. I told her only that I had come into a significant sum of money and needed immediate guidance on asset protection and claiming structure. I did not say the word lottery. She did not ask me to. "Can you come in Thursday at 11?" she said. I rearranged 2 meetings at work without explanation and said yes. In the meantime, I went through the motions of my ordinary life with what I can only describe as strange, careful grief. I sat at my desk and processed files. I answered emails. I ate lunch at my usual table near the window in the break room. I watched Sandra Krause walk past me 3 times without making eye contact, which was new. Sandra always made eye contact. It was one of her weapons, that flat, assessing gaze, like a customs officer who suspected you of something but couldn't yet prove it. On Wednesday, something happened that shifted everything. I had been going back through older records, legitimately, as part of a routine audit I'd requested in September, and that Gary had quietly delayed 3 times before finally approving last week. I found it in a batch of files from the previous fiscal year, a reimbursement claim that had been processed twice for the same vendor, approved by the same person, Sandra Krause. The amounts were not enormous. $4,300 the first time, $4,300 again 6 weeks later. But the vendor name was a company I did not recognize, a company I could not find in any of our standard contractor registries. I sat very still for a moment. Then I photographed both documents with my phone, quietly, without drawing attention. I cross-checked the vendor against the Ohio Secretary of State's business registry that evening. The company had been registered 18 months ago. Its registered agent was a man named Timothy Krause, Sandra's husband. I sat at my kitchen table with that information and felt something settle into place inside me. Not anger, not vindication, something quieter than both. Clarity. The kind that arrives when you realize you have not been imagining things. You have been correct. You have been correct all along, and no one believed you because no one was looking where you were looking. I opened a new section in my spiral notebook. I labeled it Work. I wrote down everything: dates, file numbers, amounts, names. I photographed the relevant pages of my notebook and emailed them to myself with the subject line, Recipe Notes. Something boring enough that even if someone saw my email, they would not look twice. Was this paranoia? Perhaps. But I had just discovered that the woman who had been undermining my work for 8 months was committing what looked very much like vendor fraud using company funds. And I had also just won $81 million. And I was 53 years old, and I had survived a divorce and raised a child alone and paid my own way through everything. And I had not come this far to become someone's victim now. Thursday morning, I drove to Rachel Okonkwo's office in Dublin. She was younger than I expected, mid-40s, natural hair, a very clean desk. And she listened to me without interrupting, which I appreciated more than I could say. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You want a blind trust," she said. "Yes. You want to remain anonymous on all public-facing documents. As anonymous as Ohio law permits." She nodded slowly. "Ohio allows trust claiming. Your name won't appear in the initial public disclosure. The trust becomes the claimant of record." She paused. "We'll need to move quickly. How long ago did you verify the ticket?" 12 days, I said. "You have 180 days from the draw date to claim in Ohio." She leaned forward. "But the sooner we file, the sooner the clock resets, and the sooner you have legal protection over the asset." We spent the next 2 hours building the structure. The trust would be named something unremarkable. She suggested a geographic name, nothing personal. We settled on Riverstone Asset Trust. I would be the sole beneficiary. An independent trustee would be named on all public filings. My name would appear nowhere in the lottery office's press release. When I left her office, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Prepared. But that afternoon when I returned to work, I noticed something had changed in the office. The temperature, metaphorically. Sandra was speaking to Gary in his glass-walled office, quietly, but with an intensity I hadn't seen before. She glanced up when I walked past, looked away too quickly. She was watching me. I couldn't know what she knew or suspected, but I recognized the posture of a person who had begun to calculate, had begun to wonder whether someone nearby had become unpredictable. I went back to my desk and opened a spreadsheet. I typed numbers. I looked busy and calm and entirely unremarkable. Inside, I was anything but. Because I had just realized something important. I was fighting two battles now on two separate fronts. One was the lottery, the money, the trust, the legal architecture that would protect it. The other was work, Sandra, the fraud, the years of professional gaslighting that had made me doubt my own careful observations. And the most important thing I had learned in 53 years was this. When you are fighting on two fronts, you do not split your attention. You identify which battle, if won, makes the other one irrelevant. I thought about that for a long time. 3 weeks later, Riverstone Asset Trust officially claimed the $81,247,000 Mega Millions jackpot in the state of Ohio. Rachel had coordinated everything with Howard Briggs's office. The filing was clean. The trust was airtight. I had elected the lump sum option, approximately $51.4 million before federal and state taxes, which, after withholding, would come to roughly $35.8 million in my account. Real numbers, life-altering, almost incomprehensible numbers. I still went to work that Monday. I made coffee in the same break room. I smiled at Janet. I did not look at Sandra. The Ohio Lottery Commission issued a press release that afternoon. A trust entity has claimed the November jackpot. No individual name, no photo, no human interest story. It should have been clean. It wasn't. My sister Denise called me that same evening. This was unusual. We didn't speak on Mondays. Her voice had a particular texture to it, one I recognized from childhood, from the times she wanted something and was building up to asking. Careful, slightly too cheerful. Carol, I was thinking about you today. I was telling my friend about you, actually, how you've always been so responsible, so together. That's sweet, Denise, I said. A pause. Have you heard anything about that lottery thing in Columbus? The big one? My stomach went still. Which one? I said. The Mega Millions, 81 million. I read they said a trust claimed it. Isn't that interesting? They're allowed to do that now, apparently. Protect themselves. Another pause. Do you know anything about trusts, Carol? I kept my voice light and uninflected. I work in insurance, Denise, not finance. Where did you hear about it? Oh, someone at my book club. Never mind. I just thought it was interesting. We talked for 12 more minutes about nothing in particular, and when I hung up, I sat very still and thought about what it meant that she had called, that she had brought up the lottery, that she had specifically mentioned trusts. Someone had talked. Not about me. My identity was protected. But the timing of her call, the deliberateness of it told me that someone in Denise's orbit had connected the dots in a way I hadn't anticipated. And Denise, for all her sweetness, would pull on that thread until it unraveled. The following Friday was worse. I arrived at work to find a sealed envelope on my keyboard. No return address. Inside, a single index card. Typed, not handwritten. We know about the trust. We know about you. Be smart, Carol. My hands did not shake. That surprised me. I looked around the office. Janet was on the phone. 2 junior analysts were talking at the printer. Sandra's office was empty. She was out of the building, I recalled, at a vendor meeting. I photographed the card and the envelope with my phone. I placed them in a fresh Ziploc bag. I called Rachel Okonkwo from the parking garage during my lunch break. "Someone at your workplace knows," Rachel said very calmly. "It appears so. Do you have any idea who?" I told her about Sandra, about the vendor fraud, about the timing, silence on the line. Then, "Carol, this is a threat. It's also, depending on what they do with it, potentially extortion. I want you to contact the Columbus Police Department non-emergency line today and file a report. Don't dramatize it. Don't escalate it yourself. Just document that it happened. Paper trail." I did exactly that. The following Monday, I requested a meeting with Gary Whitfield. I sat across from him with my hands folded, and I told him, in precise and unemotional language, that I had documented a pattern of irregular file processing over the past 8 months, including specific instances that I believed warranted review by the company's compliance team, and that I had already submitted copies of my documentation to HR. I had not submitted copies to HR yet. I submitted them that afternoon. Gary's face did something complicated. The sequence of a man whose comfortable arrangement had just become a liability. He nodded. He said he took it very seriously. He said he'd look into it. 2 days later, Sandra called in sick. She called in sick for 3 days in a row. When she returned, she didn't speak to me. She didn't look at me. She walked past my desk with her eyes fixed on the middle distance, and I watched her do it, and I thought, this is what the retreat of power looks like. Not dramatic, just quiet, a door closing. That weekend, I drove to Hocking Hills. I rented a small cabin, nothing extravagant, just a place with a fireplace and trees and no cell signal for the first 2 miles. I brought Biscuit in his carrier. I brought my spiral notebook. I sat on the porch in a wool blanket and watched the November trees and didn't think about Sandra or Denise or money or any of it. I slept for 10 hours both nights. I cooked eggs in the morning and fed Biscuit bits of cheese and watched a hawk circle slowly above the ridge, patient and unhurried, working some private calculation only it could see. On Sunday evening, driving back to Columbus on Route 33, I felt something that I hadn't expected to feel at that moment. Gratitude. Not for the money specifically, though I was grateful for that too. Gratitude for the clarity, for the fact that I had not panicked, for the fact that I had a notebook and a lawyer and the good sense to drive to Hocking Hills when the weight of it became too much. The hawk, I thought, doesn't panic either. It just waits. It started with flowers. I arrived at my apartment on a Tuesday evening to find a small arrangement sitting against my door. White lilies, a card tucked between the stems. I almost walked past it before I thought better of it and stopped. Picked up the card. Carol, we miss you at home. Family is everything. D. Denise. I brought the flowers inside, set them on the counter, and looked at them for a while. They were beautiful. Denise had always known how to choose flowers. It was one of the things I genuinely loved about her, her eye for small, considered gestures, which was precisely what made those gestures so effective. She understood the mechanics of warmth. She called that evening. "Did you get them?" she asked. Her voice was the softest I'd heard it in months. "I did. They're lovely. I've been thinking about you a lot, Carol. I feel like we've been distant. I don't like it." A small, vulnerable pause. Dennis says, "Well, he reached out to me, you know. He said he heard you might be going through some changes. He wanted to know if you were okay." I sat down. Dennis had reached out to Denise. Dennis, who lived in Phoenix, who had barely contacted me since Melissa's graduation 5 years ago. Dennis, whose wife Pam had called me tired but brave. "I'm fine," I said. "Nothing unusual going on, just busy with work." "Of course," Denise said warmly. "Of course. I just want you to know, whatever happens in life, I'm here. We're family." "I know that," I said. "I love you, Denise." "I love you too. We should have dinner soon." We agreed on a date, vague enough that it could be shifted, and hung up. I sat in my kitchen in the quiet. Outside, a car passed on Granville Road, headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling. Biscuit jumped onto the table and put his head under my hand. I thought about what had just happened. Not what was said, what was constructed. The flowers, the soft voice, the strategic mention of Dennis dropped in to suggest a network of people who were paying attention, who were talking about me, who were, gently, letting me know I was being watched. Was this an attempt at manipulation? Absolutely. Did that mean Denise didn't love me? No. Both things were true simultaneously, and that was the hardest kind of truth to sit with. The following week, Pam herself, not Dennis, sent me a Facebook message for the first time in 4 years. "Hey, Carol, was thinking about you. Hope life is good. Dennis says hello, accompanied by a cheerful gif of a sunrise." I didn't respond. At work, Sandra had adopted a new strategy. She was being pleasant. Professionally, surgically pleasant. She held the break room door for me. She left a comment on my quarterly file summary that was carefully, neutrally positive. She did not make any reference to what had passed between us. She moved through the office like nothing had happened, which told me she had decided to wait and observe rather than escalate. I matched her energy. I was professional. I was thorough. I documented everything I did with extra care, keeping clean records of every task, every approval, every interaction. If she was building a case, I was building a better one. But the truth was the weight of all of it, the money, the trust, the legal process still grinding forward. Denise, Sandra, Pam, the anonymous card, had begun to feel genuinely heavy. I had been carrying it alone for nearly 6 weeks, and while I am a private person by nature, there is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from having something enormous in your life that no one in your daily orbit knows about. I needed someone who knew, not to help me decide. I had Rachel for that, but just to know, to look at me at dinner and understand why I seemed different. I thought about it for 3 days, and then I called my friend Vivian. Vivian Turner was 61 years old, a retired public school principal from Clintonville, who'd been my friend since our daughters were in Girl Scouts together. She was the most discreet person I knew. Not secretive, discreet. There's a difference. Secretive people keep things because secrets give them power. Discreet people keep things because they understand that some things belong only to the people they concern. We met at a small Italian restaurant on North 4th Street on a Thursday evening. We ordered wine. I waited until the bread came. "Vivian," I said, "I need to tell you something." She looked at me over her glass. She had that quality, Vivian, of being completely present. No phone on the table, no half attention, just her eyes, steady and calm. "All right," she said. I told her everything, all of it. The ticket, Howard Briggs, Rachel, the trust, Denise, Sandra, the index card on my keyboard. I spoke quietly and she listened without interrupting, and when I was finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you sleeping?" "Better now than a few weeks ago," I said. "Are you eating?" "Yes." "Is your lawyer good?" "She's excellent." Vivian nodded slowly. "Then you're doing everything right." She picked up her wine glass. "Carol, you have handled this better than 90% of people would. The question is not whether you'll survive it. The question is just how long the noise lasts before it stops. I looked at her. That's it? I said. No advice? She smiled. My advice is, keep doing what you're doing. You don't need saving. You need someone to sit across from you and tell you that you're not crazy. She raised her glass. You're not crazy, she said. I raised mine. That dinner, I realized later, was the first night in 6 weeks that I felt entirely like myself. Denise came to Columbus on a Saturday. She didn't call ahead. She texted from her car, already 40 minutes away. Coming to see you, bringing lunch. And something in that exclamation point, that deliberate cheerfulness, that carefully manufactured spontaneity, told me that this visit had been planned for some time. The 40-minute warning was not an accident. It was the minimum amount of time required for me to let her in, but not enough time for me to prepare properly. I thought about not answering the door, but that, I decided, was not who I was. And besides, if she had come to play a hand, I wanted to see it. She arrived with a tote bag from Whole Foods, good bread, good cheese, a container of soup. She looked well. She'd done something with her hair, or maybe it was just the lipstick. We sat at my kitchen table the way we had 100 times before, and she poured the soup into bowls, and for the first 20 minutes, she was simply my sister. We talked about her book club, about Melissa's new boyfriend, a teacher named Marcus who I had met once and liked immediately, about a home repair Denise had been putting off. It was genuinely pleasant, and I let it be pleasant, because the alternative, watching for the trap the entire time, would have been exhausting and would have made me seem, rather than her, like the one who had come with an agenda. The soup was halfway finished when she set down her spoon. "Carol," she said, and the tone had changed. Still soft, but grounded now, serious in a way the earlier conversation hadn't been. "I'm just going to say this, because I love you and I think you deserve honesty." "Go ahead," I said. "I know something happened. I don't know exactly what, but I know it's something big." She held up a hand before I could respond. "I'm not asking you to confirm it. I'm not here for that. I'm here because I'm worried about you." She leaned forward slightly. "You're a private person. I respect that. But Carol, whatever you have, whatever came to you, you shouldn't be navigating it alone. And the last thing I want is for you to be taken advantage of by people who don't have your interests at heart. It was remarkably well done. I'll give her that." The offer wrapped in concern, the implication that others were predatory while she was safe, the appeal to family loyalty positioned as protection rather than interest. She had framed herself as my guardian angel. She was waiting for me to hand her the key. "Denise," I said carefully, "I appreciate that. I genuinely do. And I will tell you, honestly, that I have people helping me, good people, professionals. I'm not navigating anything alone." She blinked, a small recalibration. "I just mean family should be involved." "Involved in what?" I said. My voice was light, genuine curiosity. "What is it you think I need help with?" A pause. The first one that was actually uncertain. "Whatever it is you're going through," she said, recovering. "I'm going through a busy few months at work," I told her. "I'm fine. I'm well rested. I went to Hocking Hills last month, and I slept like a person who doesn't have anything to worry about." She looked at me for a long moment. She was searching for the crack in what I was saying, the hairline fracture where doubt would let her get a purchase. There wasn't one. I had made sure of that. She started. "Denise." I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. "I love you. When there's something to tell, I'll tell you. I promise." I squeezed her hand. "Now, Tell me more about this book club. What are you reading? She told me. We finished the soup. She stayed another hour, and when she left, she hugged me at the door, and the hug was real enough that it hurt a little. But as I watched her car pull out of the parking lot, I noticed she sat there for nearly 2 full minutes before driving away. Just sat. And I thought I understood. She was texting someone, reporting that it hadn't worked, that I hadn't opened. I went inside and stood in my hallway. 2 days later, Dennis called me for the first time in 3 years. He opened with small talk. How I was, how Melissa was, how Phoenix was in winter, warm, friendly. I answered everything honestly because there was nothing to hide in any of that. Then, midway through the call, almost as a conversational aside, "I hear you might be making some investments," he said casually. "If you ever want a second opinion, my brother-in-law is a financial guy. Very well reviewed, works with high net worth clients." "Dennis," I said, "I have a financial team, but thank you." Silence. "Okay," he said, "just offering." "I know," I said. "Tell Pam I said hi." I hung up and stood in my living room and felt the first real spike of something that wasn't calm, not anger, something closer to cold, electric alertness, the kind that lives between fear and readiness. They were coordinating. Denise and Dennis talking to each other, comparing notes, deploying separate approaches in what they hoped would feel like independent, organic outreach. The flowers, the Facebook message, the Saturday visit, the phone call with the brother-in-law conveniently at hand. How long had they been doing this? How long had they been watching and waiting and laying groundwork, hoping I would mistake their choreography for spontaneous love? I didn't let myself stay in the fear. I opened my notebook. I wrote the date. I wrote, Dennis. Financial advisor reference. Brother-in-law. I noted the call time. Then I called Rachel. "Document it," she said, the same way she always said it, steady, clean. "And Carol, this actually helps you." "How?" "Because if this ever becomes a legal matter, what you're describing is a pattern, a coordinated pattern. That's not just a family disagreement, that's evidence." I put the notebook down and looked at Biscuit. "They're not going to stop," I said to Rachel. "No," she agreed. "But you don't need them to stop. You just need to be one step ahead." One step ahead. I wrote that down too. It was Rachel who first used the word intervention, not in the therapeutic sense, in the legal one. She had been monitoring, quietly and professionally, the situation at Meridian Insurance, where I still worked. She'd also been in contact, on my behalf, with a white-collar crime attorney named David Park, who had reviewed the vendor fraud documentation I'd compiled. By late January, 11 weeks after I'd found that first duplicate reimbursement, David had enough to recommend going to the company's board directly, bypassing Gary entirely. "If Sandra finds out before the board meeting," David told me, "she will destroy records. They usually do." "Then she won't find out," I said. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday in the last week of January. I was not invited to present. David presented, with my documentation. I went to work that day as usual. I processed files. I ate lunch at my window table. I watched Sandra walk to the copier and back. At 3:47 p.m., Gary Whitfield emerged from his office and walked directly to Sandra's door. I watched through the glass. Sandra looked up. Read his face. Then she looked past him, directly at me. That look lasted approximately 2 seconds, but in those 2 seconds she knew. I could see it happen in real time. The calculation she had been running for months completing itself suddenly, the answer arriving wrong. She had been so certain I was passive. that I was the kind of person who noticed things and then accepted them because the alternative was too much effort. She had built her entire strategy on that assumption. She had been wrong. Gary closed the door. Now, the other front. A week earlier, I had called Denise and told her I needed to see her in person. Not in Columbus. I suggested we meet halfway at a diner off I-71 near Mount Gilead. She agreed immediately, which told me she thought I was finally going to open the door she'd been pressing against for months. She arrived before me. I could see her through the diner window as I pulled in, sitting at a corner booth, a coffee already in front of her. She was wearing a good blouse. She had dressed for an important conversation. Dennis was there too. I had not expected Dennis. He must have driven from Phoenix, or, more likely, had been in Ohio already, waiting. The three of us sitting in a Mount Gilead diner was either a coincidence or the most blatant coordinated pressure move I had ever been the target of. And it was not a coincidence. I walked in, sat down across from both of them, ordered a coffee from the waitress, said nothing about the surprise of Dennis until my coffee arrived. Then, "Dennis," I said pleasantly, "I didn't know you were in Ohio." "Just passing through," he said, which was a lie so transparent it was almost touching. I wrapped both hands around my mug. "I want to be straightforward with both of you," I said. "I appreciate that you care about me. I believe that you do, in the way that's possible alongside other things." I paused. "But I want to be clear. I know what the last few months have been. The calls, the visits, Denise, the Facebook message from Pam, Dennis, your brother-in-law, the financial advisor." I looked at each of them in turn. "I know it's been coordinated. I'm not angry. But I need you both to understand that it's done." Dennis opened his mouth. I raised one hand just slightly. "Let me finish," I said. "I have a lawyer. I have a financial team. I have a structure in place that protects me and protects my assets, and that none of what you are trying to do can touch." My voice was level, not cold, simply clear. If you want a relationship with me going forward, I would like that, genuinely. But it will be a relationship on honest terms, not a campaign. Denise's face had been cycling through expressions, caught, defensive, reaching for something, and now it landed on something I hadn't expected. Tears. Real ones, I thought. Or real enough. "Carol, I'm not running a campaign. I'm your sister. I was scared you were going to." "Get taken advantage of?" I said gently. "I know, but Denise, by whom? By strangers? Or by the people sitting at this table right now?" The diner was quiet around us. Somebody's fork scraped a plate. The bell above the door chimed as someone left. Dennis cleared his throat. His face had gone to a very specific kind of male discomfort, the look of a man who has been in a negotiation. He suddenly realizes he is losing. "No one's trying to take anything," he said. "Good," I said. "Then we agree." I finished my coffee. I paid for all 3 coffees because I wanted to, and because generosity from a position of security is its own kind of statement. I stood. I put on my coat. "I love you both," I said. "Call me when you want to have a real conversation." I walked out into the parking lot and got into my Honda Civic and drove south on I-71, and my hands did not shake even a little, and the accordion sound the car made at 30 miles per hour seemed, for the first time in years, not a symbol of limitation, but simply a sound. A small, temporary sound that would be gone soon enough. Sandra Krause was terminated from Meridian Insurance on February 11th. The board's compliance review had been swift, and I was told secondhand, through channels I was careful not to make obvious, thorough. The duplicate reimbursements were not an isolated incident. When compliance pulled the full vendor file history, they found a pattern going back 4 years. The company name registered to Timothy Krause had received just over $67,000 in fraudulent reimbursements. The vendor had never provided any actual service. It was, in legal terms, a straightforward case of embezzlement. Gary Whitfield was placed on administrative leave pending a separate review into whether he had known, or should have known, what was happening under his supervision. Sandra and Timothy were referred to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office. I learned all of this in a phone call from David Park on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my car in the Meridian parking garage when he told me. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat in the car for a minute. Then I drove home. I did not feel triumph, exactly. What I felt was something closer to what I imagine a surgeon feels when a procedure goes as planned, the satisfaction of precision. I had seen the problem. I had documented it correctly. I had handed it to the right people and let the right processes run. The outcome was the outcome. It was enough. At work, the days immediately following Sandra's termination had a specific texture, a kind of collective held breath, the office recalibrating itself around an absence. Janet came to my desk and said quietly, "I always knew something was off." I nodded and said nothing. I was careful about that. The time for saying "I told you so" was never, because it was unnecessary. The record spoke for itself. Gary Whitfield did not return from administrative leave. By March, his position had been posted internally. The Meridian situation resolved cleanly. The other front took a little longer. By late February, the financial structure for my lottery winnings was fully operational. Riverstone Asset Trust had been funded. Rachel had helped me establish a relationship with a fee-only financial advisory firm in Columbus, one with no commission incentives, no product to sell me, just hourly advice. And I had spent 4 sessions over 6 weeks beginning to understand what $35.8 million, properly managed, looked like as a long-term plan. I gave myself a budget. I decided to replace the Honda Civic not with anything extravagant, a newer, reliable car, something that didn't sound like it was expressing grief at highway speeds. I bought a 2025 Subaru Outback in dark blue. I paid cash. The dealership salesperson was so startled he checked the account number twice. I also, quietly, made 3 decisions that had nothing to do with spending and everything to do with who I wanted to be afterward. First, I told Melissa. I drove to Westerville on a Sunday in March, brought groceries, made dinner at her apartment. After we'd eaten, while we were sitting on her couch with tea, I told her. All of it. The ticket, the trust, the legal process, the months of quiet work to protect it. Her face went through 12 different expressions in about 45 seconds. Then she started crying. Then she started laughing. Then she hugged me for a very long time. "Mom," she said against my shoulder, "you are the most Carol person in the world." "Is that good?" I asked. "It's the best thing," she said. Second, I set aside a specific amount, not an enormous sum, but meaningful, in a separate account designated for Melissa's future, her student loans if she wanted them paid, a down payment on a home, career transitions, whatever she needed, when she needed it. I had a document drawn up that she wouldn't know about until I chose to tell her. The point was not the money. The point was the intention, the deliberate decision to extend care forward into her life without strings. Third, I did not give Denise or Dennis anything. This was not cruelty. It was, I had come to understand, the most honest thing I could do. Giving them money now, in the context of what had passed, would not have been generosity. It would have been a reward for the behavior they had demonstrated. It would have confirmed, for them and for me, that the pressure campaign had been worth running. I was not willing to teach that lesson. I did call Denise in March. We had a real conversation, possibly the most honest one we'd had in years. I told her that I loved her and that the visit to the diner had been hurtful and that I understood why she'd done it and that I needed time before I could think about what came next for us. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she was sorry. I believed her enough. With Dennis, there was nothing to say. We had not been close in years. The Phoenix call had been an opportunistic calculation, not an act of care. I wished him well in the abstract and left it at that. By April, I had handed in my notice at Meridian Insurance. I gave them 6 weeks, professionally, cleanly, with letters of reference that would serve anyone who deserved them. On my last day, Janet hugged me and said she hoped I was going somewhere good. I told her I was. I drove out of the Meridian parking garage for the last time in the dark blue Subaru, and I merged onto the highway, and the car made no sound at all except the clean, quiet hum of a reliable engine doing exactly what it was built to do. A year later, I was sitting on the porch of my new house. Not an extravagant house, a well-built Craftsman near Clintonville, 3 bedrooms, a yard with an old oak tree strung with lights that I'd left exactly as I found it. I had paid cash. When I stood in that kitchen for the first time and looked out at the oak, I thought, yes. Biscuit had claimed the bay window as his permanent post and spent his days there in profound contentment. I understood the feeling. I was consulting part-time for a nonprofit focused on financial literacy for low-income adults, 12 hours a week, no more. The work used what I knew, systems, patterns, records, and put it somewhere that mattered. The rest of my time was mine. Melissa and Marcus got engaged in the spring. The dinner was at my house. She cried. I cried. It was loud and perfect. Denise and I were speaking again, carefully, honestly, the way you test ice before trusting it. She'd started therapy. I was glad. Sandra Krause had been charged with 2 felony counts in Franklin County. Timothy had taken a plea deal. I didn't follow the case closely. I had done my part. Dennis and Pam had separated. I heard it from Melissa. I felt something complicated and didn't examine it too closely. The money hadn't changed me. It had simply created space for the person I'd always been to finally become visible. I had always been this woman. I just hadn't been seen. What would you have done? If Howard Briggs had said those words to you before you tell anyone, could you have waited?